Within 4 months of his victory at Gaugamela, in January of 330 BC, Alexander takes over Darius's palace and the city of Persepolis in ancient Persia. Now, all of Persia, its capital city, and literally tons of gold and silver bullion belong to Alexander.
The minimum estimate is of 180,000 talents of it, and you have to remember that a talent is 57.5 pounds weight. This made him the richest man in the known world. He could do what he liked. He could call himself God if he wanted.
It's like taking over the whole of Fort Knox one afternoon, and that treasure was evacuated and sent in a great bullion train escorted by 6,000 Macedonians.
Alexander described Persepolis to the Macedonians as the most hateful of the cities of Asia and gave it over to his soldiers to plunder. The Macedonians raced into it, slaughtering all the men whom they met and plundering the residences. Such was their exceeding lust for loot that they fought with each other and killed many of their fellows who had appropriated a greater portion of it. Some cut off the hands of those who were grasping at disputed property, being driven mad by their passions.
Basking in the spoils of victory, Alexander remains with his army at Persepolis 4 months before continuing his conquest of Asia.
Alexander had some great natural gifts, but all those were marred by his inexcusable fondness for drink. At a daytime drinking party, a courtesan claimed that if Alexander gave the order to burn the Persian palace, he would earn the deepest gratitude among the Greeks. The king was enthusiastic. "Why do we not revenge Greece, then, and put the city to the torch?" Alexander took the lead, setting fire to the palace, to be followed by his drinking companions. Such was the end of the palace that ruled all the East. The Macedonians were ashamed that a city of such distinction had been destroyed by their king during a drunken orgy. As for Alexander, it is generally agreed that when sleep had brought him back to his senses after his drunken bout, he regretted his actions.
By the summer of 330 BC, there is little doubt, at least in Alexander's mind, that he rules Asia. But it isn't enough for Alexander to control Darius's kingdom. He passionately continues to pursue Darius, not to kill him, but to take him prisoner.
It was, I suppose, the ultimate in legitimizing. The previous ruler recognizes him not merely as the conqueror, but as the natural monarch of Persia, and almost abdicates for him. How long he would have lived after that, we don't know, but I'm sure that was the thinking behind it.
The other important reason for getting his hands on Darius, either dead or alive, was to make sure, and alive is better than dead, to make sure that no pretenders pop up. He's fighting against a culture that is used to having pretenders pop up and say, "I'm Darius. No, I'm Darius. No, I'm Darius." And the reason why this could occur is because there's no ABC, NBC, CBS, there's no CNN, there's no C-SPAN. The only way you could be absolutely certain that you had gained control of the king of the previous dynasty and say, "We're done with this dynasty," is to have him alive in your possession.
When Alexander learns Darius is heading north, he again takes up the chase.
So rapid was the march that many of the men, unable to stand the pace, dropped out. A number of horses were worked to death, but Alexander pressed on regardless of loss. At this juncture, two important persons in Darius's army sought an interview with Alexander. They reported that Darius had been forcibly seized and put under arrest by his own commanders. Bessus, One of his generals had assumed power in his place. Instantly, Alexander was on the march again, with greater rapidity than ever.
June 330 BC. Alexander's army marches day and night to catch up with the Persian army under the control of Bessus. Within 2 weeks, Alexander has the Persian troops in sight. Even though the Persian army is still far greater in number than that of Alexander, thousands of Persian soldiers surrender. Bessus, however, would not allow such a fate for Darius.
Bessus and his fellow conspirators came to Darius's wagon and started urging him to mount a horse and flee to escape his enemy. Darius, however, declared that the gods had come to avenge him and, calling for Alexander's protection, refused to go along with the traitors. At this they were furious. They hurled their spears at the king and left him there, run through many times. They also maimed his animals to prevent them advancing any further. Deprived of their leaders, the barbarians scattered wherever hope or panic directed them.
With the great and powerful Darius lying severely wounded, only time would dictate whether Alexander would be able to capture him alive. When Alexander's forces finally catch up to the fleeing Persian troops, they find Darius barely clinging to life.
They found him at his last gasp. He asked for a drink, and he swallowed some cold water, which a Macedonian brought him. He said, "This is the final stroke of misfortune, that I should accept a service from you and not be able to return it. But Alexander will reward you for your kindness, and the gods will repay him for his courtesy towards my mother and my wife and my children." As he said this, he took the Macedonian by the hand and died. When Alexander came up, he showed his grief and distress at the king's death, and unfastening his own cloak, he threw it over the body and covered it. Later, after he captured Bessus, who had murdered the king, Alexander had the tops of 2 straight trees bent down so that they met, and part of Bessus's body was tied to each. Then when each tree was let go and sprang back to its upright position, the part of the body attached to it was torn off by the recoil. As for Darius's body, he sent it to his mother to be laid out in royal state.
With Darius dead, Alexander's conquest will ultimately be assured. But in the ensuing months, Alexander faces new enemies within his own army and within himself. With Persia under Alexander's control and King Darius dead, the mission of Alexander the Great is essentially complete. But Alexander now faces new dilemmas, far more complex than waging war.
It's very revealing that it's after Gaugamela that the restlessness among the troops really begins to start, on the very reasonable basis that, look, we've done what we were set out to do. We have destroyed the control of the Persian Empire. We've done it. Now let's go home.
At this time, Alexander becomes acutely aware of potential threats to his power.
Among the Macedonians at this time, few men enjoyed a more prominent position than Philotas, the son of Parmenio. When Darius had been defeated, a beautiful Greek girl named Antigone was handed over to Philotas. He confided to her that all the greatest achievements in this campaign had been the work of his father and himself. Antigone repeated these remarks